You either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And before we kick off things today, Chris, got a question for you.
Yeah.
What dessert or treat would you betray your entire family and an entire kingdom for?
I don't know about me personally, but I know what my husband would.
What's that?
There is a Reese's Cup Klondike bar out there. I think I'd be dead. I think I'd be sold off to the White Witch.
Your husband would sell you for peanut butter. You don't even need a Klondike bar. Your husband would sell you for peanut butter.
Yeah, probably. I mean, yeah. He has gotten pickier about his peanut butter, though. So it'd have to be, like, quality peanut butter.
As one does when you consume as much peanut butter he does.
True.
Yeah.
Do you have something you would sell your siblings for?
You've seen me devour an entire bag of Swedish fish and offer everyone, like, 2.
This is true. It was a little terrifying.
I love Swedish fish.
Yeah, okay.
I like old-timey candy.
Same.
Except for, what's that one that tastes like worse than licorice?
Worse than licorice?
Yes, there's one that it's like a licorice derivative, but it's worse.
I don't know that one. I like licorice, so...
I like red licorice, not licorice.
Red licorice isn't real licorice.
No.
That's like saying white chocolate's chocolate. That's lies.
It is. And we are discussing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
The first of the Chronicles of Narnia.
Specifically the 2005 one?
Yeah.
Yes, 2005.
Because let's be real here, this movie has been remade a lot of times.
And this is the one everyone is familiar with.
I would say this is the most current one everyone's familiar with. I think the British adaptation from the 88, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I have the VHS tapes for, the Puppet Lion.
The glorious one with the beaver suits.
Yeah, the beaver suit one. I think that one was actually pretty, like, well-loved and received for our parents.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were like, we loved that one, let's take our kids to see the new Narnia. And then this one has just, like, wrecked the playing field.
Oh, yeah. No. And I think part of that is, this series in particular owes a lot, or just young adult movies in general owe a big debt to the Harry Potter franchise.
Oh, yeah. I think, and this was something that, like, I had run into a whole bunch, was they were saying that they were originally worried that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe wouldn't do well overseas because they were worried about the British barrier and people not understanding culture and having too much of a shock there. Which, now, looking at it, I'm like, what shock? What culture problem do you think there would... What do you think? But, I mean, we've also lived in a world where there's always been Harry Potter and, like, a predominant British understanding. So, yeah, I guess I could see the confusion if you weren't actively into that sort of literature.
Well, and I can speak from a military kid's point of view, moving to Germany for the first time, and then moving back to the States was completely different because the only stuff I remembered of the States was Alaska and Ohio when I was there on vacation.
Oh, Ohio.
And even then, I don't remember Ohio that well, other than my Grammy and Popo's house.
That, for all you really need, is most of Ohio.
Okay. I mean, I've been back a couple times, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and even then, Alaska's a completely different world, we'll say.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely certain states in America that, like, there's no denying you're in that state. Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of, like, the conglomeration of everyone else. Yeah. And, like, yeah, if you look at them from a microscopic, or if you're living here, you can tell the differences. But it'd be hard to remember them separately. Yeah.
And another thing I think that's interesting, and I've been thinking about a little bit, is how much just modern high fan. Well, and that's the thing I've been struggling with. I don't know if we would actually consider The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe high fantasy.
That's a good point.
Because most of the people I know and my ideal of high fantasy, Lord of the Rings is the peak.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of an interesting tie-in, because when C.S. Lewis was writing the original book, he was really worried that people would think that it was too much like Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first one of the first iterations he did, which he ended up scrapping, he did give to Tolkien to read, and Tolkien didn't like it, and so he tried again. Yeah,
that's right, because they were good friends.
Yeah, they were. They were part of the same pen pal / writers group, the Inklings.
Okay.
And so, yeah, the two of them would read each other's works, and they'd talk about plots and stories and characters. And that was one of C.S. Lewis's remarks that we do have some solid record of. There's a lot of stories about C.S. Lewis, especially connected to this series, that honestly we don't have a lot of proof to back up. But his worry that this series would be misunderstood was pretty well documented.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's interesting too, and important to distinguish, and why I think Lord of the Rings is just that little bit more so like the pinnacle of high fantasy, is we know Tolkien wrote everything in detail, where I've been trying to get through the Silmarillion, and that's
a struggle.
It is a struggle, and I'm listening to it on audiobook while I'm working.
Which is arguably the easier way to get through it, because I've tried to read it on a handful of times, and man, it's rough.
And this person birthed this person, who birthed this person, who was the distant uncle of the person we actually care about.
Yeah. Oh man, it's one of those books where you have to pull out your old writing and reading techniques from school, where you like make flashcards for who's who, who's related to who, and also like kind of what they look like, because they also change occasionally, and or like descriptions are just non-existent.
Oh yeah, like the Vala can like change their form whenever they want, so of course that's going to be confusing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But why I was getting to that is with Tolkien, he wrote everything so seriously, and like he had everything meticulously planned out.
The whole world's thought through.
Exactly. Whereas C.S. Lewis, from my understanding, he wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which took him years to write.
Yeah, 10 years.
Yeah, and he didn't even have like the entire world built up at that point. Like it kind of developed. So he left a lot to the imagination.
He did, and that was also just part of his writing style in general. You can see it in some of his other works, and you can even see it in his, I think you can see a nice version of it in his later Narnia books, because The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, the first one he wrote, it took him a long time, he left a lot to the imagination, and then by the 7th book, there's still a lot left to the imagination, but you feel like everything's there for you to imagine. It feels purposeful.
Yeah.
Which some people I have run into really, really like, and some people really hate.
And we come into similar things with that with like cosmic horror, where specifically H.P. Lovecraft didn't explain a lot of stuff. It's like, it's a mess of tentacles and goat legs. And it's like, what the hell? What does that mean?
Yeah. And I think part of that helped really nicely with the new Chronicles of Narnia movie, because the older ones, from the ones I've seen the animated one, I think it came out in 1987, I think. It's the one with a bright red Mr. Tumnus.
Oh.
It's not good.
Yeah, see, I didn't do much research past basically the origin of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and just what I heard from special features, because that's almost all my sources for today is just commentary by the writers, directors, producers, costume designers, production designers, all that group.
Definitely. And I'm not gonna lie, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe was one of my favorite books growing up, so I've read it, and countless times I own the original VHS tapes, and so I've seen those a bunch, and then of course I own, and I've watched this one. I think I watch it almost every Christmas, because for some reason it's a Christmas movie in our house. I mean, it's winter, I guess, and like Father Christmas shows up, so like thus it's a Christmas movie.
Which I know, I mean, that is kind of a weird thing, because normally, for me, a Christmas movie has become, what movies have I watched during the Christmas holiday with my family? Like, gone to a theater and seen. That's why Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, Lord of the Rings all have that kind of feel to them.
Yeah.
But I mean, this movie was released in October, which is a weird or weird time for that to be released.
Yeah, it did come out at kind of a weird time, but at the same time, this was one of the...
Scratch that. I just realized why. It was the third most successful film of 2005.
Yes, it was.
Guess what else came out that year?
There's a lot that came out that year.
Harry Potter.
Yes.
And the Goblet of Fire.
Yep.
Which was a Christmas movie.
Yes, it was.
These are both, well, one's Disney and one's Warner Brothers, but yeah, you can understand them not wanting to compete with the tank that was Harry Potter at the time.
Oh no, I don't think you'd want that.
And Star Wars Episode 3, which came out earlier in the year.
And this, I mean, those were just the other two top contenders. Mm-hmm. This movie really did phenomenally at theaters. And then, on top of that, once it was released to DVD 2006, it was the best-selling DVD in 2006.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, and honestly, I think the DVD version is where it fully, took flight and, really shone. Because, everyone saw it in theaters. Everyone liked it in theaters. I saw it in theaters. It was good in theaters. I argue it's better at home. I argue that it's a better DVD watch.
I don't really remember seeing this in theaters, honestly, because... At this time, 2005, where was I at? I was in Nebraska still, so I don't remember if I actually saw it in theaters or not. But, for me, I don't know personally in that regard. I do know that originally there was 3 different DVDs released.
Yes, there was.
There was a regular edition, a special 2-disc edition, which is the one I found.
Yep.
And the one that I am so glad I did not find because I would be compelled to go through all of it.
Yep.
A 4-disc collector's edition.
Yeah.
And I don't know what else they could have added to that because...
My friend had that one. We watched it a lot.
There's so much to it. Even just the 2-disc set, I spent multiple days going through everything after work, just trying to
it's a lot.
Oh, yeah, there's so much to this.
For just this one.
This one movie, exactly.
Yeah, which is part of the reason why we're not doing the entirety of the Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, yeah.
We might loop back around because, and thank the Lord Jesus, they are talking about making the rest of them into a TV series with Netflix.
Yes.
I think it would do well as a TV series. I argue that it always should have been a TV series, but... And so maybe eventually we'll get to loop back around to this one.
That's a good point that I kind of want to get into later on because we've had a little bit of discussions because I picked up the other 2 just in case we decided, okay, you know what, let's just cover Narnia in one big swoop.
Yeah, there's no one big swoop for Narnia.
Yeah, and then I rewatched all 3 of them and I'm like, we can't do all 3 of these in even 2 episodes. Each one of them would almost have to be its own episode.
That's true.
So, back to a little bit how this movie actually got started. They were wanting to make a film in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yep.
And there were a couple issues with it. First off, the original producers wanted to make it set in the early 90s, and they wanted to modernize it.
Which, okay, I understand wanting to modernize things. I would argue that World War II is not so far in the past that it needs modernizing for children to understand it.
Especially in the 90s.
Yeah.
I would say when people our age, their kids are coming around, that's a little bit too far in the past. Kind of like how World War I's just that far off in the past from us.
Yeah, I could definitely see in maybe 10 years' time, we will hit that cusp where it will be a little bit awkward. But in the 90s, there was so much other stuff that was World War II based that was for kids that I agree with why they didn't get a whole lot of positive feedback on that.
Well, and part of it too, Douglas Grisham, who is C.S. Lewis's stepson, opposed the modern setting and didn't believe that the technology was just there yet.
And you know what? After rewatching my beloved puppet version of Narnia, I agree with the man. He was spot on the money.
Oh yeah, because even going back to early, the first the very first Star Wars reboot, Episode 1, and it's
still fun, but it doesn't look the same.
It hasn't aged super well.
Yeah,
and I would say practical effects would have been better, but that was George Lucas's whole blue screen, green screen phase.
Yeah, and that's part of the charm for that movie, but part of the current charm of Narnia, and something that we have recently gotten to hear new, like, hey, why didn't you? Is the CGI and filming and the practical effects that were used for this movie were spot on. They were so good that, like, to the point where people were wondering why they didn't use Aslan's model for the new Lion King, because let's be real, them lions looked real bad. They were dead inside.
Well, and that's the thing too, that I want to get into it a little bit when we talk about the special effects for this movie, because Aslan, like, this entire thing was done by, most of it was done, like, the special effects were done by Weta.
Yes.
Who...
This is by far their biggest piece. Don't worry, you haven't, like, missed them entirely. I had to look them up, too.
It's not their biggest piece. Lord of the Rings.
Well, yes.
They were created specifically for Lord of the Rings. Yeah. That's why I would say there's very much that similar feeling between the two.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I do think they managed to stand out enough that you don't feel like it's a ripoff of one or the other. Yeah,
they're their own separate entities.
Definitely. And I also think this one managed to do something that Lord of the Rings, while I love Lord of the Rings, don't get me wrong, with all my heart and soul, I would argue Narnia did a better job of blending their special effects and their practical effects.
Yes, because that was the key thing about this movie, too, is it was a combination of both.
It was a bigger combination than I think a lot of people realized.
Oh, yeah. It's impressive.
Yeah.
And there's, like, such little details. Like, at one point in it, in the big battle scene, a rhino runs by, and I always thought he just tripped over.
Yeah.
And rewatching it, there's these, like, little chicken goblins that are slicing its legs. Like, it's just, like, little things like that.
There's a lot going on all the time.
And that's part of the thing, too, is they spent a lot of time in production staging stuff. Like, okay, this is where we're going to do it. This is, we're scoping out this location.
And they knew this was going to take a long time. And so this is one of the few movies that I've heard of where they purposely filmed most of the scenes in chronological order.
Yes.
Because they knew they were also working with children actors who, as hard as you try, as we Harry Potter fans know, you can't really stop kids from aging. And
looking at you, Neville Longbottom.
Looking directly at you. Especially because with Harry Potter, we did get some leeway with, there's a lot of kids, so we can hopefully hide some people in the background. We can pull them away from the movie screen a little bit. There's only 4 kids in Narnia.
Yeah.
And if you know, Susie suddenly grows up,
well, there's another part to that too that I'll go into a little bit more once we get to who actually directed this movie.
Yes.
So there was another interesting part another interesting development stated by producer Mark Johnson. When The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was being developed at Paramount, the imperative was to set it in the U.S. and it just didn't hold.
Yeah, no, of course it didn't hold. The whole, like, charm of this entire book series is the Britishness of it all.
Yep.
Like, a lot of people make a strong time with Tolkien's writing and being very British and British-inspired, which you can see. But boy, C.S. Lewis blew Tolkien out of the water with his Britishness of Narnia. Like, everyone in this, like, series is quaintly and delightfully British.
And and I would say the British in Lord of the Rings is the Hobbits.
Oh, they're straight up.
Bilbo is bitching and complaining the entire Hobbit movie that things aren't to his liking. He's not comfortable.
He's not comfortable.
This is so dreary.
Yes, and the other thing that makes Narnia's Britishness more, especially for American audiences, I think, even more delightful is where Tolkien kind of pulled from very pocketed bits of British culture to inspire. Narnia, you see a wider range of British influence from all the different characters, from his own personal life and travels and friends and family. So you get more Northern Ireland from some people, you get more Britain from other characters.
It's a very Arthurian tale.
It is a very Arthurian tale, and it's because he has that range all brought together in one, and it's not even, like, advertised, so most American audiences don't catch it until you read up on it or hear someone who's more familiar with it talk about it, but because it's all there, the whole thing feels much more realistic and much more wholesomely together and, you know, pleasantly Britain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what they did after this is the first person, if I remember right, the very first person they asked to direct this, one of my personal favorites, Guillermo del Toro.
I saw that and immediately thought, I'm kind of glad he didn't.
Because
I'm sure he would have shot an artistically beautiful thing. I would argue that his children's fairy tale telling abilities are maybe not quite what I would want.
Well, and his stories generally are a little bit darker, and that's really reflective, even in his lighter works.
Yeah.
But I feel that special effects wise, we probably would have something of similar quality, if not.
Yeah, I would see that.
It would be different.
It'd be different.
But he denied that he's turned it down because at the time he was working on Pan's Labyrinth,
which that's quintessentially his. That's a good movie.
His piece de resistance.
It really is. That movie is one of the few ones that he's directed that no matter who has seen it, it sticks to you like glue. Yeah,
I think that was actually the first foreign film we got my dad to watch.
Ooh, that's a solid starter foreign film.
And it's just a solid movie in general.
It really is. You don't even really need to know what's going on.
Because I didn't see Pan's Labyrinth until I was in high school.
That's a good age to watch Pan's Labyrinth.
Actually, no. I started it in high school because they were watching it on a soccer trip. And I didn't get into it because we were driving and I have to read and I get motion sickness.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I actually watched it until I moved back to the States. But I just fell in love with it. His entire world building.
It was a beautifully dark movie.
Mm-hmm. And so after Del Toro passed it up, we had Andrew Adamson.
Who, honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better pick.
Honestly, looking back at it, he is because he even said that he didn't want to do a movie like this because for those of you who don't know,
tell us what other things he's been involved in.
Andrew Adamson directed the first two Shrek movies.
Yes, he did. And not did he just direct them. He had literally just got done directing them.
Yeah, and I think he was done with Shrek 1, was it?
It was Shrek 1 he got done with when they offered it to him, and he was a little worried that they were too similar in fairy tale-esque-ness.
Yes, and so when he thought about it, because he really didn't want to do this, but he thought about it, and he thought to himself, if he didn't do this, if he didn't take this chance, some other director would do it, and they would not meet his idea for it.
Which is, I think, something that makes him the perfect pick, because not only did he say, oh, well, no one else is going to do this how I want to watch this movie, because he legitimately liked the books, but he hadn't seen them or read them in a while. And so instead of rereading them and reproducing them, which is what we had seen in the past, like the animated one I think is like an hour and a half long for a 1987 animated retelling of this book. The one with puppets from 88, also terribly long. I think it's almost 2 hours. And it's because it's word for word the book.
Yeah.
Where he vaguely remembered the book and went, that's kind of what I'm going to do.
Well, and that's what he did originally too, is he wrote a 20-page adaptation just based on the memory of his book.
Which, to be fair, and I love the book Chronicles of Narnia, but I honestly think that the memory and impression of the book is the better part of the book. The book is good. It's not the best read of the century.
Yeah.
And I would argue it's not the best storytelling of the century either, but the memory and impression that the story leaves on you, that's where Narnia really shines.
Well, and I think that's one thing to say about it too, is when you see Narnia, or when you read Narnia, because I tried getting to the audiobook. I've just been inundated with lots of heavy editing and research heavy work right now, so haven't had time to actually. I got up to the point where they get to Narnia, and all of them get to Narnia.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of, once one of them gets to Narnia, what special drink do we have today that we would sell our family for?
Yes. I don't know if I'd sell my family for this one, but part of the vagueness of C.S. Lewis was he explicitly says what snack, Edmund. Oh my gosh. I always want to call Edmund Edmit, I have always wanted to call him Edmund. I know his name is not Edmund. But we know he likes Turkish Delight.
Mm-hmm.
But we have also made a pact to not eat food on this show.
Yes.
We tried that once, never again.
No. Never.
But Edmund also asks for something hot to drink, and even in the book itself, it doesn't say what Edmund drinks.
Mm-hmm.
So today I have brought a warm, hot, frothy, smooth beverage.
Tai Chi, or what is it?
Well, the box calls itself chai latte, but it doesn't taste like chai latte.
I don't know what it tastes like. It's a bit sweet.
That's how it was described in the book. So that's what we've got. We've got Edmund's brew.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Surprised you didn't get hot chocolate.
I have hot chocolate at home.
But I won't drink it.
You won't drink it. And I reread the little passage to try and figure out what drink it probably was.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just described as hot, sweet, frothy, kind of creamy beverage that warms him to his toes. And that doesn't really sound like hot chocolate to me. And also, let's be real, Edmund is a weird frickin' little child. His favorite candy on this planet is Turkish Delight. Which, don't get me wrong, I like Turkish Delight, but I like old people food, and I'm not a 12-year-old little boy.
I mean, he also it's Britain during World War II.
This is true. It's Britain during World War II. At least he didn't ask for, like, canned ham or something.
He doesn't have, like, Haribo and 500 different options.
Yeah, but, like, I don't know. I feel like a normal child asks for, like, cake or cookies, or even if they're not into cake and cookies, they ask for like gummies or gumdrops or like hard candy. Edmund straight up asks for Turkish Delight, and because he doesn't specify, we can assume that it is the traditionally flavored rose water, which is the pink version shown in the movie, which I like, but I also apparently like eating perfume, as my husband says, because we've tried it. Most people hate it. Rose water is not an everybody flavor.
I like the rose water one, but I prefer the orange blossom one.
I do too. Everyone else that we know, though, much prefers the chocolate or strawberry flavor.
Yeah.
But he doesn't ask for that, so we have to assume that it's flower-flavored candy. What a sad little boy.
Hey, whatever keeps him happy.
So for all we know, Edmund asks for a latte.
Mm-hmm. And so we honestly couldn't have asked for a better director for this movie.
Oh, no, it wouldn't have been close.
I feel that Adamson, the way he talks about the movie and the way he just has this love for this movie. Again, it's a story he grew up with. And back to like how people experienced it. I didn't experience Narnia until I was in my teens. And at that point, I'd already gone through Lord of the Rings. Yeah,
like this is, I think, for most people, a precursor to Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, too, is Tolkien wrote his as a piece of literature.
Yes.
C.S. Lewis wrote this it's a piece of literature, but it was written more as a children's story.
Oh, definitely. And the other thing that makes, that I think C.S. Lewis and Anderson really jive together, Adamson. So we've talked about how C.S. Lewis regularly leaves things up to the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of the shooting for the movie, Adamson would not tell or show anyone what things were going to look like. A really good example is Mr. Tumnus's costume and design.
Mm-hmm.
So when the actress sees him for the first time, she said that she screamed for real because she didn't know he was going to be in full getup. Horns, like he had furry pants on, and he's forced to act in tiptoes with green tights so that they can just put the hooves. The hooves were the only part they added in.
Yeah. No, and that's impressive too, because that costume just feels real. Yeah. Because I know you have a fawn costume too.
I do. I have had many attempts at a fawn costume. None of them are very good.
The recent one's pretty good.
Yeah, the recent one's the best one, but it's also the most simplistic version.
Hey, sometimes simple's best.
Sometimes simple's best, but to be honest with you, getting to be Mr. Tumnus level costume has always been something that I've strived to try and do with my cosplaying and my Halloween costuming, and I have never even gotten close. The amount of detail put into him alone as a character, especially because while Mr. Tumnus is an important character, he's arguably not on screen for very long.
No, he's really not.
It would have been very easy to just have him be fully CGI'd.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that actually leads to another point later on in the movie, when he's captured by the Ice Witch.
Yeah. And
he's in the cage, and they brought him into that scene. He's not originally in that scene, because after he's kidnapped by the White Queen, we never hear from him again.
Yeah, no, it's assumed he's
and they use that to add guilt to Edmund.
Yeah. And honestly, this is probably the best version of Edmund.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the other adaptations, either being the radio version or the old movies, Edmund was either way too much of a prick, and like you just kind of wanted to punch him, or Edmund was just kind of like a know-it-all kid who wasn't really bad, and so his actions didn't line up with him selling his siblings for some hot chocolate and being a prince. And so this Edmund felt very real, and then the amount of time they gave him for his character development also felt much better than even in the book. I would argue in the book it feels kind of instantaneously. He feels guilty, he's sad about it, and it turns around pretty quickly. In the movie, like, you feel both sides, you know, resentment, but also sad and guilt, and that's hard to do.
And they mentioned that a couple times, is that was the point of dragging that out a little bit, is because things were over too quickly in the book.
Yeah, things happened really fast in the book.
The battle scene is such a small portion of the book that they're like, this is the big moment. We can't, because that's what Adamson said, is that he didn't realize how, because he remembers the battle scene as being this big epic battle when he was a kid, but he went back and reread it after writing his 20-page script, and like,
it's not very long.
He's like, oh, it's only a couple pages and it's over.
Yeah.
And he did some rearranging of stuff. Definitely played better for a cinematic viewpoint.
Yeah, it did.
But one thing I want to go back to Tumnus a little bit.
My favorite character.
One of my becoming favorite actors.
Yeah, I know,
James McAvoy.
An amazing actor.
I forget that he's in this movie. I know he's in this movie, and every time I'm, like, when they're pulling into the station, his name pops up, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's in this.
And then immediately he just turns into Mr. Tumnus.
Yeah, and he's got this nice little accent. He's got this nice, clean British accent. And then you watch an interview with him, and he's got this thick, heavy Scottish accent.
Yes,
and
he does.
It's a lovely Scottish accent, too.
It definitely is, but yeah, he's one of the actors who and granted, when you're working with children actors, I shouldn't say you should put the bar low, but I think you should expect what's available to them to do. They don't have a lot of acting experience. They're children.
Yeah.
So the fact that he was able to literally become and embody Mr. Tumnus to the point where he's in other things, and I honestly don't recognize him.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't change his face. It's not like they've put, you know, a bunch of makeup or changed his face dramatically. They've added some horns and some curlier hair to him. Yeah. And a scarf.
God. And just his 13 personalities in Splinter? No, not Splinter. What's the one that came out before Glass in the Unbreakable trilogy?
I've forgotten.
Whatever that movie is.
Yeah.
He's amazing in that. He plays 13 people in one movie.
He's a very good character actor.
Yeah.
And I think his acting, and then on top of that, the voice acting for all of the other characters who don't get human parts, like the Beavers or Aslan, really do make this movie super believable, because the children aren't having to super act to things. They're being just as surprised and awed and wondered as we are.
Yeah, because I know they would do a couple things, because behind the scenes they were showing them talking to, like, the Beavers, and the Beavers, they had a couple different props to them. Like, one of them is just like a stand-in where it's like this little white figure. So that way when she takes the tissue from them, she's actually taking a tissue from a CGI creature rather than trying to CGI a tissue, which is really hard to do.
And honestly, it's little touches like that that make the CGI age really nicely. Honestly, though, Narnia, at this point, I don't think we've reached a point where the CGI itself looks old yet. It still looks really good, but even once we get to that point, because there's more tangible bits to this movie, I think that's why it will last as long as it will.
Oh yeah. No, and going back and rewatching this specifically as an adult, it it has a different feel because I'm watching for the special effects. I'm watching for a lot of different things. Because one of the cool things too, one of the interesting things that I thought about Adamson rearranging the story was how they actually get to Narnia in the first place, or how Lucy does. Because originally she just walks into a closet, and he always thought that was the weirdest thing for a child to do.
Why would you just walk into the closet? I mean, granted, children are weird, and like in the book it does work, but also I think in the book you could argue that the children are more children-esque. Like they're much more naive and more dumb, I guess. Well, they're not really dumb, but the versions of them in Narnia, you feel the weight of their world and their current history happening around them. Whereas the ones in the book, honestly, they don't talk about the war very much in the book. No. It's glazed over almost immediately. They get dropped off and that's kind of it.
Well, and that's the thing they wanted to do too with it, is they wanted to make it clear set, okay, this is World War II. These children are in danger. This is the only reason they're being sent off.
Yeah, and honestly, I think a lot of people complained about that. I remember when this movie came out, a lot of people complained about the extra war scenes at the beginning. They felt like it was just padding. It wasn't necessary. But as a kid, when I was reading the book, I didn't catch any of that. So like all of the character traits that each child represented was just them being themselves. Whereas in this version, you can see the oldest two being more adult because of the world. You can see them trying to protect Lucy. You can see Edmund rebelling out against his circumstances and how the world isn't fair. Yeah. And it makes them feel more real.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another little thing about kind of how they get into Narnia is, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I actually think that the ambiguity of C.S. Lewis's writing lends itself to being able to be manipulated a little bit more, because, okay, you take out this little bit, you take out this little bit, you condense it down into a digestible piece, and it adds to what the artist can do.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the wardrobe itself is never really described in the movie at all, or in the book.
No, but it's more described in chronologically the first, written wise the last book. It's described a tiny bit more. Like we know it's made out of apple wood, but yeah, the amount of detail put into the wardrobe that we see, I remember distinctly like whole posters of Lucy standing in front of the wardrobe, and that was the whole poster. Yeah, and
I mean the DVD I have, that is the cover of the case.
And it wasn't just like one scene that like, oh wow, that one freeze frame is really amazing or gorgeous. There was like, I had a friend who had like 4 or 5 different posters of different angles of Lucy and the wardrobe.
Well, that was the one thing that they wanted to do. Her pulling a cover off of it was a last minute decision.
Oh, it was a brilliant decision though.
And it works because now you have this little like 5-second bit of a reveal of like, there's just that added tension of her, instead of like her opening the door and there's just a closet sitting there. That might work a little better in like a horror film or something where there's an object you're not expecting to be there. Yeah. But in a children's movie, that little veil adds a little bit of mystery. And then you have the reveal of this beautifully laced or beautifully crafted, etched wardrobe, carved. I like that better. Yeah. But something you might find interesting, because they had leeway in whatever they wanted to do with the wardrobe, the entire carvings, all the carvings on it, tell the story of the magician's son or apprentice?
The magician's apprentice.
The magician's apprentice. Yeah. Because, as you've told me, the old man was the one who... Yeah. There's whole lore to this.
Yeah. And honestly, that's one of the... I think a lot of people, that's their frustration, is there's a lot to The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, which... It is a flushed out story, but there's a lot of things that were left to question, because I think they knew from the get-go that this was probably going to be a full world. They were trying to develop it with also the understanding that there is at any point they were just going to have to stop. Yeah. Which works out really nicely because they did have to stop. They only got through 3 of them, unfortunately. But in their defense, those are kind of the 3 big ones. After that, I think the children are only kind of vaguely in one other story, and they're not really in it. They're like, they're currently the rulers and the story's about someone else.
And
sort of situation.
That's kind of the thing that I wanted to bring up a little bit later, but I'll bring it up now before I forget it. When I rewatched all 3 of these, I felt like why I think the series would do better as a TV show is because they are so episodic.
Yes.
That honestly, you could know that they went to Narnia. Narnia used to be this magical place.
Yep.
And then you can immediately go to Prince Caspian.
Yeah.
And
it'd also give you time to flush out some of the more detail-y bits, I think, a little bit more roundedly. Because, a lot of people's complaint was, I don't know why does this man have a magic wardrobe? There was a lot of who's and why's and what's, and, well, why is there a evil witch? It just says that she's brought here. And unless you read all of the books, you're not going to get those answers.
Yeah.
Granted, a lot of us have read those books. Like, it's not like some secret story that no one's read, or it's a hard book to get through, like Tolkien's books, where, like, Silmarillion.
God. Damn, that...
Yeah.
Like, as much as I love Lord of the Rings, I've only gotten about up through halfway through the Two Towers.
They're hard reads. They're dedicated time and effort to read them. Whereas Narnia reads really nicely.
And Tolkien's is very much... It feels very old speak. It
is, yeah, I see what you mean. And Tolkien's also, there's a lot to keep track of. There's a lot of detail all the time. I don't care what color the grass is. I don't care about hobbits running naked through the meadows. Yeah, I think it was a good choice to leave that bit out of the movie. Good on you, Peter Jackson. Good life choice. Whereas with the entire world of Narnia, the books do read really nicely. So a lot of us went in with that knowledge. And it was kind of nice that Adamson didn't put it in the movie blatantly for you. Yeah. He expected you to have also read them at some point in your life so that you could also remember the story with him. And I honestly think that works the best for this. Because, if you're a diehard Narnia fan from the books, it's not the same. Because you'll have imagined all this in your head, and you'll be missing your favorite part. Your favorite line won't be in there. Things are in the wrong order. Yeah. But if you read it when you were a kid and you liked it, this is really beautifully done. Yeah. And I think he might take stuff away from it, but I think he adds just enough as well. Because once they're in Narnia, from what I heard from the directors, because I didn't get to this part in the book or in the audiobook, I got to, they mentioned that they added the fox character in to make it, to add that, okay, there's this tension in this land. Yeah. They're building up, okay, maybe there's this underground going on. Yeah. And part of that was because, and he hints at it here and there, like example being when, the 2 girls towards the end of the movie use the trees to warn everyone of the impending danger. In the book, it's much more explained all the time that the entire world of Narnia talks and is alive and has a soul, which plays on later on in the books. Yeah. But that's a lot to handle all in a movie, and how do you do that nicely, visually? Thank you, computer. I thought I told you not to make noises, though. But... So the fact that it's still in there, it's still hinted at, but he adds visually impactful characters like a fox as opposed to just trees whispering quietly to each other and waving in the wind. Well, it works really nicely. And Adamson actually fiddled around with changing that because he felt it was too clean, like as a story-wise, because I know in the book, before the battle even starts, they know Aslan's on his way. Yeah. Like, they're well aware of it. So he changed it up a little bit where they warn them that, okay, there's something coming, but they don't tell them, they don't know that Aslan's on the way. And so Aslan we think it's well done. What's the term? I think it's called parallel action where like 2 things are happening at the same time. The battle starts and then it cuts back to them crying over Aslan and then that him coming into the battle at the last minute, what I'll call his Gandalf moment, where he takes down the final boss to get all the sweet EXP. Yeah, it's a little Gandalf-y, I'll give you that. But as a movie, that plays a lot better. Yeah, no, it really does. And I think it was the liberties like that or like when Father Christmas shows up, that makes the story run really smoothly. Whereas if it had all gone as the book is written, while you're reading it, it works and it feels fluid and all that. But that's because you need breaks when you're reading.
Yeah.
You don't need that many. You don't need the same type of breaks when you're watching a movie.
I will argue against that. You do need
breaks. You don't need the same breaks.
Yes, it's not like, oh, action scene. Oh, we gotta cool down a little bit.
Yep.
Action scene. A little bit bigger action scene, cool down.
And
climax.
Well, and in books too, an action scene can all be in someone's head,
Mm-hmm.
or the reveal of the fact that the trees do walk and talk, not just talk to each other.
Yeah, it makes me think of like you can read an action scene and you're like, okay, this is like a 3-minute fight scene,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like what what's his name? I'm gonna hate myself for it because he just, I know the director's name, but he just did Guy Ritchie.
Oh, okay.
Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes, where he broke down Sherlock's,
Exactly.
like, okay, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z, and that takes like 30 seconds for him to explain, and it's done in 5.
Exactly.
And it's that kind of
Yeah.
manipulation of time that I think this movie does a great job with.
Yeah, it really does. And the other things that I think he changed that really helped visually explain the story better was a lot of things in C.S. Lewis's writing. They're described, but like we said with the drinks at the beginning, they're not really described. You
No.
know, you kind of have a gist of what it is, and that's good enough. So when he was going in, the character design, for example, the White Witch, is a very specific and stunning character design. She doesn't really look like how the book described her.
I want to go into that in just a little bit,
Yeah.
because her costuming is...
Oh. And honestly, up until I think Maleficent, she was, like, it didn't matter what version of her you saw. You saw icy crown,
Mhm.
you saw white blonde hair, and you knew who that was supposed to be. You knew that she was supposed to have some evilness to her, that she was supposed to be super powerful. And we didn't really get a female character design like that until the new version of Maleficent came out.
Yeah. Disaster movie kind of ruined her for me a little bit.
Yeah, fair.
They refer to her as the white bitch.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's close enough where I can't not think of that every time.
Yeah, fair.
But I want to go back to Father Christmas a little bit.
Oh, Father Christmas.
I wish I'd done a little bit more digging into this, just because we knew him as Santa Claus, but he and Father Christmas are different entities.
Yes.
Which I know was a big contention between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. It almost ended their friendship. Because Tolkien didn't believe that Father Christmas belonged to C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, and that was kind of a funny thing, because up until Father Christmas, and arguably even more so after Father Christmas, the Narnia world doesn't really have one specific place it's pulling its lore from. There's bits from practically everywhere minus Asian countries. So... for example, all of the villain-esque creatures and demons of the night, they're pulled from not just British lore, there's some from Greek and Roman, and even some older ones. And then on top of that, C.S. Lewis, and this is one of the other things that we do have some recollection from himself from writings and letters, he didn't want this to be a direct translation of the Christ story. He wanted to see what would happen in a different world with the same problems and circulations, and it ended up being a pretty direct, an allegory. Is that the word?
Allegorical story, yeah.
Yeah, and so the fact that Father Christmas is now in there, which is arguably a more recognizable, specific character from history and lore.
Yes.
It at one point feels a little weird, but at the same time feels very balanced. Yeah,
no, I mean, it's... I would say it's kind of pop culture of the time, but it's not at the same time. It's a part of established culture.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes Father Christmas in both the book and the movie work, I think, is, first off, he's not Santa Claus.
No.
He's Father Christmas. So that leaves depending on where you are in the world, Father Christmas means a little bit different person and different lore, which works really nicely. And then on top of that, it shows that Narnia as a world has big named characters and lore and people in it other than just Aslan.
And ones that bleed into our reality. Exactly. Because that's the thing that you've tried explaining the origin of Narnia to me like probably 4 or 5 times, and
you just got to read the book.
It's hella confusing, but
it is.
Apparently there's some beings that can transverse the world.
Yes. The worlds are all in a way connected.
The ones that I know of, Aslan,
yeah.
Father Christmas, and the White Witch by accident.
Yes.
Because
she got in, she can't get out.
Going back a little bit to her, I learned from this that the light pole. She gets into Britain at some point.
Yes, she does.
And causes chaos. And
for a whole, 10 seconds.
And then on her way out, pulls a lamppost with her. But because the lamppost is alien to Narnia, they wanted it to, instead of just being like the top of a lamppost, they wanted it to feel like it had rooted itself and started to grow like a tree.
Yeah.
But it still kept the lamppost top.
And the detail that was put into the movie that helped bring that feeling to a lot of us who had read the books and knew about the lamppost, helps that the lamppost, and I think I might be wrong, I think it is described in the books as always being on and lit, even though there's no gas source, because it would have been a gas-lit street lamp. It makes a normal street lamp that they could have just put a street lamp in the forest, and that still would have been pretty cool. Yeah. But the fact that it's on makes it feel permanent
and integrated into the landscape. Because if I remember right, the 81, the TV movie, it's just a lamppost.
Yeah, I mean, granted, a lot of the special effects in the TV movie were a little cut and dry. Yeah, I think they were, budget wasn't as large as this one. I don't think.
Probably not.
But yeah, no, and honestly, in the book, it's not super described in a whole lot of detail. It just kind of says lamppost, and as an American kid, I didn't grow up with cool lampposts. I grew up with silver ones with a gooseneck coming out of it, and that's your whole lamppost. We didn't call them lampposts, we called them streetlights.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like, when it was like, oh, it's a lamppost, the only idea of a lamppost I had was the one drawn on the front of the book, which is, like, the most basic of, like, London-styled, rustic, old one. And it vaguely reminded me of the one that my grandmother had, because we don't have those necessarily everywhere. But we do have little tiny versions that old people put in their gardens, and you flick a switch and a light bulb turns on. It doesn't light anything up, it's just for the birds. Rustic. Yeah. And so, like, it was really nice to see a one with a lot of detail, and it felt old. It felt like it had been in the forest a long time, but it also felt alive. Yes. Somehow.
Speaking of things that weren't alive. Yes. The reindeers.
Yeah, I read about that.
Those were animatronic that they made sure, I think it was Creatures Inc., who was this practical special effects. They made it so that way the skins could be taken off so that they could double as Father Christmases and the White Witches, because they wanted to bring a real reindeer into New Zealand.
And New Zealand told them no.
Because they carry some Q virus or something that can be transferred to bovine.
Yeah.
And
we had problems with it here in America, but we've got a lot of bovine and a lot of deer. So, like, it was a problem. It wasn't a problem as a small, isolated country like New Zealand would have.
Well, the government said,
no reindeer for you.
No, they said any reindeer you bring in, we will shoot on sight.
But
they got wolves in.
They did. And not just wolves, wolf hybrids.
Yes.
Which, when you're watching the movie, I don't think it occurs to me at all that the wolves could be real wolves ever.
And that's the thing, too.
That's part of the reason, though, is because the CGI is so good.
CGI is good, but they interlace them into each other. They actually had to, because when the dogs are running through the woods to get to the beaver's lodge, they had to actually Photoshop out and put in digital tails because the wolves were too happy. They had too happy of tails.
They were having too much fun.
Yeah, which they actually brought like a coordinator on who he's like, okay, well, here's how the wolves would actually behave in this environment. Like, this is what they'll do. They're not going to run under this. They're going to jump over it. Yeah. And just little stuff like that.
Which honestly helps a lot with this movie because for a movie that has a lot of talking animals and talking fake animals, none of the animals have the oddball fantasy world animal problem that a lot of other ones do.
No.
A good example is the polar bears that pull the White Witch's sleigh during the big battle. They're very similar looking to the polar bear used for the Golden Compass series.
Mm-hmm.
But the Golden Compass series polar bears always had a very, like, fake teddy bear feel to them, even though they were supposed to be these great warriors and wearing armor and all that. But the polar bears from this one, somehow, even though we know they can talk, and we know they have probably their own, like, Congress and, like, voting system and mailboxes, they feel like polar bears. They feel like real scary polar bears that are going to come eat somebody.
Well, I don't know. I think it's just a hybrid of the techniques used, because we don't know what's parts practical and what... Well, I mean, we can somewhat tell more now, but, like...
And on top of that, the amount of detail they put into understanding what the animals would realistically do, like with the wolves, it really does help a lot.
Yeah. I do want to backtrack a little bit because I want to go back to the White Witch. Because we keep bringing her up a little bit, and there's a lot to talk to her about her character and her environment. So one thing I thought that was interesting was her castle.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Do you know what his inspiration was for that? You'd just been to Barcelona.
Ooh, you're right. It does look like Casa Familia.
Yep, Sagrada de Familia.
Yeah.
Yep, that was his inspiration for that.
As an architect, all I want in life is to live long enough for them to finish it.
It's coming out. It's going to be done soon.
They keep saying that. They've been saying that for 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful building. And it's interesting, too, because that building, very much like the wardrobe, when you go into the building, because I've seen photos.
Oh, yeah.
We've
all seen photos.
It is its own world inside.
It really is.
But the entire outside of the building, Antonio Gaudi carved the entire Bible story on it. And like the wardrobe, unless you know the story of the wardrobe, you won't, or know that it's there.
A lot of people miss it.
Yeah, a lot of people miss it. And that was something, and I think that's one thing that plays into this movie is all the little detail that that you kind of take for granted. Antonio Gaudi said, when they asked him, why are you doing this? No one's going to notice the detail. He says, I'll know it's there. Yeah.
And honestly, for a lot of us who grew up loving the books, that detail was part of the reason why it was our favorite movie. We watched it over and over again for the detail.
Yeah.
And yeah, the witch's castle, and then the concrete statues / concrete versions and stone versions of all the animals. You know, we've seen concrete cast versions put out as the animals. We've also seen poorly drawn ones, and I think in the book they're described, but not to the extent that we see in this version of the movie.
Yeah,
and I think that really helped with causing a lot more worry and understanding how terrible the witch was.
Yes,
because in the book you do understand that, like, oh, these are real characters and people getting turned into stone. But in the movie, you literally see that it is physically anguishing to be turned into stone, and then you're stuck like that.
Yeah, no. And who knows if they actually feel stuff in there.
I don't think the movie explains, which, I mean, probably saved us some time.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there was a lot of visual detail that helps really solidify all of the characters, not just the White Witch.
Oh, and just the level of detail that went into her, because when we first meet her, we know she's bad from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a children's story. You should know who the bad guy is.
They tried to steer away from her being the fair-skinned, dark-hair, evil stepmother.
I mean, she was originally supposed to have black hair.
Yeah, and well, that's the thing, is and they made the conscious decision because of Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, not Beauty and the Beast, all those movies with evil, Cinderella.
Yep.
There had been so many movies like that when C.S. Lewis wrote this, it didn't feel like a cliche. But in 2005, that was a cliche.
Yeah.
And even the way she talks to Edmund the first time, she's just cold.
Yeah.
And then the moment she raises her voice, it's like, okay, maybe there's something there. But her costume is what I really wanted to talk about.
Her costume was arguably one of the best things.
They said that they wanted her costume not just to be a costume, it was more like a part of her.
Yeah, and
it was a mood ring.
Yeah.
And even her crown, because when I was designing the logo for this episode, I was clicking through photos of her and I'm like, her crown keeps changing sizes. Oh, that's just some oversight by the costuming department or something.
No, it was not.
Nope. As spring comes, her crown starts melting.
Yep.
She gets lighter and lighter clothing until she's wearing all black at the ritual, where she kills Aslan. And in that, beautiful outfit for that.
Fantastic outfit.
But they also wanted to portray her as kind of cat-like. They were inspired by the way cats, when they're about to murder something, their pupils just dilate almost to where you can't see any color in their eyes.
Ah, yes.
And her eyes are pitch black. Not like supernatural pitch black, just the iris and the pupils all black. Like right before she kills him.
It's a very high intense feel. And then on top of that, not just her crown, but and you talked about how her dress changes to black. You can also see it in the neckline of detailing.
Yep.
There's certain scenes and parts where the dress doesn't even feel like it's sitting on her. It feels like it's growing out of her.
Yeah.
And it's that level of detail that they could have just put her in a dress with like a traditional neck piece and a crown, or even had just the crown growing out of her. But the fact that her whole wardrobe seems to be physically attached to her makes her like, you get that nope feel from her.
Because she's got like 4 costumes in the movie.
Yeah.
And then even then when she's coming into battle, after she's stripped Aslan's mane, she's wearing the mane.
Yep.
She is a warrior at that point.
Oh, she's pretty badass for a bad guy.
Oh, yeah. No, and I think that's the compelling thing, because a lot of times we make these villains to be kind of mediocre, honestly. Like
Disney itself has a big problem with. They've gotten better. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that was part of the interesting bit is Disney did help fund this. Let's say
this is a Disney movie.
They own part of it. It was a co-production, but normal Disney villains you're told they're bad. You're told they've done bad things. Maybe you get to see them turn someone to stone, but that someone's coming back and it's all good and cheerful. But the White Witch, she does win, kind of. She just didn't count on the guy coming back from the dead. Which, fair. Me neither.
Yeah, no. And bringing back everyone she's turned to stone. Like,
yeah, that, I mean, in her defense, she's arguably the most successful bad guy, I think.
Yeah, because I was just thinking back to Van Helsing.
Oh, Van Helsing.
And as much as we like the representation of Dracula, he's kind of boring, not super interesting villain. Yeah, no,
he's kind of just hanging out doing his own thing. Especially at the beginning, they explain he's got the castle on the hill. He kills someone once a month.
He's got his castle and he's got his fuck shack.
Yeah, that's all he wants. Whereas she is actively attempting to ruin an entire nation.
Yeah,
and it's implied that after she conquers Narnia, she's going to move on to the next one over.
It's like the second half of Final Fantasy VI. She has conquered this country.
Yeah,
there's a resistance. But she is the queen at that time.
Yeah, no, she's completely stomped it. Her goal at this point is crush every last one underneath her foot, and then we'll start moving on to the next place over sort of problem.
Yeah.
Which, in the book anyway, they don't really explain it, at least not in the first one. Narnia is kind of a big country. It's not really a teeny tiny little New Zealand-sized country. It's supposed to be fairly large.
It's another thing. This movie was filmed in New Zealand.
Of course it was filmed in New Zealand.
The high fantasy capital of the world.
They really should start playing into that a little higher. Not in a tourism way, but maybe as hey, here's hotels that are really luxurious for your actors to stay in, and here's our helicopter corps. They're all very nicely trained in aerial pilot and photography.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I feel like they've already got that down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she honestly is, because she almost kills the kids at one point, too. She was
gonna kill Edmund right away, and then he's like, oh, I have siblings, and she's like, damn it, got siblings.
Well, no, even then, I'm talking about the big battle, she almost killed them, too, there, until Aslan does the Gandalf move.
Yeah. She's a pretty good bad guy.
Oh, she is. And let's talk about Aslan for a little bit, too, because he honestly doesn't have a big part in the movie.
Well, there's a reason.
Voiced by Liam Neeson.
Honestly, could not have picked a better voice actor for this character.
Silky smooth. I think James Earl Jones would have been too Lion King, too deep.
He would have been too Lion King and too deep. And he's silky smooth. He's a distinct, rememberable voice, but he also hadn't really voiced any, like, god-esque characters at this point, which helps because all of the other people who came to my mind when I was thinking of who else I would want to play Aslan, they'd already played God, which arguably that's the correlation with Aslan, is he's Christ-esque, God-esque. You don't really want someone previously to be God to also voice Aslan. You want him to be his own thing.
He is the Keanu of Narnia.
He is the Keanu of Narnia, yes.
Although, maybe not at that time, but maybe now Keanu would have been a good...
Yeah, no, I don't think originally, but...
No.
Well, I don't know. I think if he was a live acting, yes. I don't know if voice-wise. I don't know if his voice necessarily holds the same level of power.
I watched a documentary where he voiced it
Yeah.
about Toshiro Mifune, so...
I mean, yeah. It's always a hard call.
Yeah,
but
Liam Neeson's perfect.
Liam Neeson did a damn good job. But a lot of people, and I'd hint on this before, a lot of people were upset with the new Disney live-action Lion King, and I say live-action loosely here. They were upset that the lions in that one didn't have a ton of emotion that expressed, and they're like, well, we didn't want it to look fake, and people are like, well, Narnia's lion looks like a very real lion, but he shows emotion wonderfully, his jaw moves correctly for how we want a lion to speak, he looks and feels very real. Part of that was because of how long it took to render this bad boy.
Mm-hmm. Especially in 2005.
Especially in 2005, and as someone who has been forced to render large things before, I feel so sorry for the rendering department. They were troopers.
We have to render single images, not frames.
No, I had to render a whole building because we did a 3D model of it once, which that took me 4 days of solid rendering to do. Luckily, I had my own computer, and I was in my own home. I didn't even have to go into a studio to do it. Yeah. So I was very privileged to be able to render for 3 days in my own home, while also having a separate borrowed laptop to keep working.
Good.
These guys, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but...
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Like, every second he's on screen, it took them, like, 10 hours of rendering or something like that. Something absolutely astronomically crazy like that. Which is part of the reason why he's only on screen very briefly.
And when we do see him too, there's 4 Aslans. There's the computer one. There's a stand-in, so that way they can get where to put the computer one, and so that way when someone like pushes him over,
it's part of the reason why when you see the girls touching the lion, like a lot of times when characters are touching CGI characters, especially in older ones, but even in new ones, they don't look like they're actually touching anything. It looks all poofy and like kind of. It doesn't have the weight that you want. Aslan, you can almost feel how soft that lion is through the screen.
I'll say in almost every scene, but the one where they're riding the him, because that one's a bit rough nowadays.
It didn't age super great,
but. That's the third Aslan, is they were actually on a physical prop that was moving, and then they CGI'd over it, which you've got that disconnect. Yeah. And then they had the one that they loved the most. They made a super realistic one where he's on the altar and they're laying on him. That's a real prop.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, Aslan, I get story-wise, he's not there. He is very much like a Gandalf character. He's really more supposed to be a guiding force instead of being...
Yeah, and in the book, he's present a lot more, which was part of a lot of people's complaint when the movie was out, was, he wasn't in it a whole lot. But honestly, him not being in it actually made him feel more powerful and more Gandalf-esque. Yeah. Because I think if he had been there as much as he is in the book, he would have felt a little hand-holdy. Whereas with him being absent in this movie, all of the children's overcoming of obstacles and becoming kings and queens, it doesn't just feel like, this lion's gonna handhold them through being kings and queens. You feel like they could probably really do it.
Yeah. Actually, side tangent. I just thought of the new name that I'm going to call the Lion King from now on.
Knockoff Aslan?
Nope. The Lion King HD Remake.
HD Remake. Oh, yeah. That's kind of what it was.
But yeah, so I mean, Aslan's great in the movie. He's barely there. So, I mean, that's all we really have to talk about him, though, too.
Yeah, I don't know. But at the same time, it works.
Yeah.
It works in the same way that, especially if you're watching it again, and especially as an adult, you're looking for different background characters to, like, pique your interest.
Yeah.
Aslan, arguably on screen more than a lot of them are, but the fact that they're only on screen for a little bit, you don't feel overwhelmed with, like, oh, they only have fawns and giants and, like, that weird troll Minotaur thing.
Yeah.
Because they're not on screen a whole lot, you have time to go, oh, there's that thing, and what's that thing, and oh, they've added this creature down here, and oh, little tiny chicken ones with stabby things.
Yes. So one thing that I want to retrace a little bit, because we've treated this group of people almost as if they're not in the movie so far. The four children.
The four children, yes. Arguably the main characters.
They are the main characters.
I mean, yeah. Well, I think at least in the book, Lucy is the true main character. You follow her and her thoughts the most.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and I like how they balance out the four children in this one. Lucy makes the plot move. That's her role. But yeah, we do spend quite a lot of time with all four kind of collectively, which I like. I like having more than one main character.
Oh, yeah. And Lucy definitely still feels like the main character, because as we've talked before, anytime you have multiple characters, there's always going to be the one main.
Well, and arguably her whole role, her whole existence in both the book and the movies is to make the plot move.
Yeah.
And whoever makes the plot move is
the main character.
They're going to feel like the main character no matter what you do.
And all these children, from what I remember, is they were actually cast all in the same day.
Yep.
Which was important because they wanted them to feel natural.
Yes.
They were all unknowns at this point. And honestly, outside of this, they haven't really done a whole lot either. But they also, the reason the movie was filmed in chronological order, which is what Adamson did great.
Yeah, it was
and
well done.
Why he was perfect for this, because one, he crafted Shrek.
Yes, he did.
Shrek was hella crafted.
Yeah, I know he was.
He wanted the children to grow with the story.
Yeah.
Because as they grew, they actually physically grew. Because during production, the boy who played Edmund, his voice broke.
Yes.
And if I remember right, some of his later lines had to be recorded by his younger sister. Because they were kind of roughly the same age, or before their voices really turned. So they had almost the same voice.
Nice.
But like partway through, he couldn't
hit it quite the same.
Hit it quite the same. One thing I will say, if you get a chance, it's interesting to hear the banter between the director and the four kids on their commentary. It's not super insightful. It's more about a lot of the stuff the kids were going through.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to hear the viewpoint of like a child actor.
Yeah, it is. Especially because for a lot of us anyway, our first introduction to children actors was Harry Potter. And while Harry Potter was incredibly insightful, it was kind of a really oddball, it still is, oddball scenario for children actors, because it wasn't one movie shot chronologically. It was shot over almost a decade, if not maybe longer. And so, like, it was getting to the point where, like, people lived there. They were doing their homework on set. Like, they were becoming actual Hogwarts students. Whereas the kids for Narnia, while Adamson did an amazing job of making Narnia come alive for them so that their reactions and their joy and their surprise would be very real. You can't live in Narnia like you could on the set of Harry Potter. So yeah, hearing how they had to handle different circumstances, how, like, I mean, for the actors, we think of them as kind of like self bubbles of, like, you know, they go out, they film, they come home. Kids don't get that luxury. Well, they still have to be kids and do kid things. And
the guy who played Peter, he went through a major growth spurt during that, because he remembered, I think he went like 6 months without seeing his dad. And he showed up to set, and I think he was taller than his dad.
Yeah.
Because, like, it took his dad a second to recognize, like, oh, this is my son now.
You've gotten so much taller. Not just a little bit, a lot bit.
Like, I think they said he grew, like, a foot or so during production.
Yeah.
Like, that is impressive. Because I think they only spent, like, 6 to 8 months filming this.
They shot it oddly fast. Like,
Mhm.
granted, now, like, especially now that we have more movies with long-term filming for children actors, I don't think a shorter time frame is surprising anymore. But back then, having a full-fledged movie with they're the main characters, it's not like they disappear at the end of the movie and come back as adults.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of do, but then they don't. Having a short time frame makes more sense.
That's another interesting thing, too. The only part that I knew that wasn't really filmed in chronological order is them coming out of the wardrobe. Because they knew they would change before... Oh, sorry. Before the end of the movie. And so they filmed that early on, so that way it wasn't this harsh transition of, like... Because Narnia is... Like, they explain more so in the book than they do the movie that the time frame in Narnia, because the professor has a bigger role in the book, at least in the beginning, because Peter and Susan have a conversation with him about Lucy, and she's like, well, what if she was only gone for like a second, like we just left the room and she was there, and he's like, well, what if the time spent over there doesn't correlate to the time in this world?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that was kind of my only ever real complaint. And it wasn't really a justifiable complaint. The professor in the book was a very artfully crafted character. He added a lot to the lore and hinting at and providing the children with some level of guidance without also being their guiding character, which didn't really translate super great in the movie. In fact, it apparently didn't translate to the point where multiple people in our friend group legitimately thought the professor and Aslan were supposed to be the same person. That's
what I thought for a long time,
yeah, apparently a lot of people, as someone who read the book, it's blatantly obvious that they're very different, and it's so obvious that the professor knows Aslan.
And I don't know...
But he never tells you in the first book, really.
Yeah, and I don't know how the book ends. I think that's where people got thrown off, because he's sitting outside the wardrobe when they come out. And I think that's where people would have been misled, is that, okay, he was there at the end of the battle, he's kind of disappeared after that. Yeah. And then he shows back up. But even then, like, going back to the children themselves, because that's what this part's about. Yes. Is, they actually have decent arcs.
Yeah, like, they do.
Peter's having to learn to understand that he can't be the father figure for them.
Yeah.
He can be the older brother, but he's not a father.
He's not their dad. And on top of that, I think Peter also, and this is something that I think the book does a better job, because it does explain their adult lives in Narnia a little bit more. And they kind of explain it a tiny little bit at the end of the movie, where they're explaining they're going off to find the white stag.
Yeah, okay, which...
Did anyone explain that to y'all, or...
You explained it to me, because I rewatched it, and I asked you, what the hell are they doing at the end? Are they hunting their own citizens? Like, what dystopia future has this become? And
well, I mean, you would like later on, because Narnia does turn a little dystopia.
Yeah, you've told me that. But you had to explain to me that not all the animals are sentient.
No, and the white stag in particular, and this is something that I feel like they could have done in the movie, but, this is at the very end, and again, I think Adamson expected you to have remembered this part.
Again, playing off people knowing the story.
Yeah, which is fair. So, in the book anyways, so at the end, it's explained that the movie kind of glosses over it, they state it, but time for them doesn't just, like, speed up. They live full lives, they truly become kings and queens of Narnia, and one of the Narnia lores, kind of like Santa Claus, is a white stag. Okay. And the white stag, and this is kind of based off of real world history too, and real world lore. The white stag, if you can catch it, will grant you any wish. And so that's what they're doing, is they're trying to catch the white stag, because it's this mythical magic creature that's going to grant a wish, and it's like a fun game. Okay. But yeah, they kind of gloss over that in the movie. The book explains it more, and it also explains, like, why they're all adults. And, like... Which,
good casting, because they do feel like they're adults.
No, they do. And it does feel like them, too, which is nice.
One little bit of trivia about that. The actress who plays Susan's adult form is her older sister.
You know, that works.
They had enough facial recognition enough to be like, okay, we can tie these together.
Yeah, I think that's nice.
But yeah, I mean, really, it's an interesting thing because child actors are difficult to cast.
It's hard.
Because one, you don't know how well they're going to do. You don't know really what experience they can, or what they can bring to the story.
Yeah.
Whereas like this one, especially really young characters, like going back to Star Wars a little bit, Episode 1, the kid who played Anakin, notoriously bad, got bullied to the point where he doesn't ever want to do anything. He's burned all his memorabilia. He threw it away because people ruined it for him.
Yeah.
And he's just a kid. Kids can only do so much.
Yeah, there's only so much.
You can't be the Macaulay Culkin of child actors.
Well, and even Macaulay Culkin, like, he's not really acting anymore. Like, he was a really awesome child actor, but clearly that wasn't what he wanted to do with his whole life.
No. But Lucy.
Yeah, Lucy was a phenomenal child
Fantastic job. She definitely feels like she's an awe and wonder.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of not just their acting, but the world everyone who worked on this movie came into doing. Because, like, one of the things they were describing with the costuming the characters, specifically the one I remember they were talking about was the Minotaur. Where they're like, okay, well, we want them to be more distinguished. Like, why? How can we make them more distinguished? Well, all they have to do is fight and craft armor.
Yeah.
So, what do? Instead of giving them, like, orc armor that's just haphazardly smashed together, it's crafted.
Yeah.
There's a level of refined work to it. They're not these savage barbarians. And that's the great thing, too, about this movie, I would say, is that they really make a distinction that this world is civilized. Yes. The creatures in it aren't these naked Animal Crossing characters. They actually work for what they have.
And it's not just the good characters who craft. It's shown that all of the creatures in Narnia, while they may not be on the same type of crafting, which I would argue is one of the oddball parts of Tolkien's world, where this race does this and this race does that. And you don't really, unless you've read all of the lore and gone really far into it, it's harder to see why each one is so stuck in a box, one might call it. Why
Gimli is racist towards the elves.
Yes, that too. Whereas with Narnia, you feel very much that everyone could work on armor. Any like the beavers could also, but they've chosen to continue doing beaver things.
Little thing that a lot of people missed and I've missed when they serve fish and chips.
Fish and chips.
Fish and wood chips.
Wood chips. Isn't that cute?
It is adorable.
So cute.
I love the beavers in this movie.
Oh my gosh,
and that's another thing too. They said after the beavers guide them out to the river, you don't really hear from them ever again. And that's why they brought them into the last battle, because again, these are characters that stuck with people, and then they go back and reread it, and it's like, okay,
they're not really there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think you even hear about them until either the end of the first book, or like they come back very briefly, I think, in another story. But yeah, no, a lot of the characters in the Narnia world, they don't get a lot of screen time, even in the book. And so it was nice that, and this version did it differently than the others, where, like, example being the coronation ceremony shows all the characters, and even the ones that, like, you don't care about, like the lion that got doodled on. I don't care about the lion, but he's there. Whereas with some of the older ones, there would be, like, generic fill-in characters, or I think the live action one, there's no one. It's just, like, them and the lion.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, it felt you understood the scale of the world without losing the connections that you had tried to make with these characters throughout their journey, which is part of the reason why I'm excited for this to become a TV show, because then I think we might get that one or two recurring characters that they don't recur every episode, but maybe they come back 2 or 3 times, and that's all I really want.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one thing I'll say about the legacy of this movie is, I mean, even if you haven't seen the other two, the first one sticks with you.
Oh, it really does.
Like, you have your characters you love, the world is fresh and new, which that was one thing that they wanted to do with designing the world, and why it's so bright compared to, like, Lord of the Rings, because it was supposed to feel like it was a new world. And from what you've explained to me of the lore, Narnia is a relatively new world. That's why all the most of the animals can talk.
They've still got magic.
They've still got magic.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't want to get into the lore of Narnia because that's...
Not yet, anyway. If the TV show comes out, you gotta binge all of the books.
Yeah, maybe. But going back to like the longevity of this series and why I think the other two movies in the series failed I won't say they failed. No, I mean,
money-wise, they did great.
They did very well, but they were, because by the third one,
I mean, there was a decline.
There was a decline, but like, I was talking to my mom about this, before, like, months ago when we decided to do this episode, and I found out that there's a third movie.
There is.
Neither of us knew there was a third movie.
Voyage of the Dawn Terrier, which arguably I like more than Prince Caspian.
And for me, I didn't really care for them too much. Like,
a lot of people didn't fall in love again with the second and third one. Yeah. Because
the third one just, and I don't know if it was just the casting direction, the acting, or I won't say the acting. The acting's still solid.
Yeah.
I think it was just, it's so episodic that if each one had been its own mini-series, it might have done better that way, because after the first one, the two older siblings are gone.
Yep.
And then by the third one, both the other children are out, and they have an annoying cousin with them.
Yep.
And I don't care about the cousin. Like, he's just...
and that was part of, for those of us who loved the books, when they announced that they were going to be making all of these, a lot of us have our favorite book. And to be honest with you, none of my friends would claim that the second or third book are their favorite.
Yeah.
At all. Like, a lot of us love the fourth book or the fifth book. Some of us like the sixth book. I think it's a little weird. But, yeah, the second and third story, they're good. They're wonderful reads, but they don't read out like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
Which is part of the problem with readapting them. And the other problem is, part of the reason why this version of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe worked, as we've said, is because it's based more off of your memory of the book that you had read when you were a kid. Not as many people bother to read Prince Caspian or Voyage of the Dawn Terrier.
I think I'm going to go back on that a little bit. And isn't Dawn Treader?
Yeah, Dawn Treader.
Dawn Terrier. The little rat dog that appears at dawn.
I don't think there was a rat dog on...
in the book. Like terriers. Terriers were
yes,
hunting.
But there was a rat.
Yes, there was.
And a very cute rat.
Yeah, there's a lot to that one. But I'm gonna actually go back to the difference between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's writing. I'm sure when he wrote Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, he had a little bit of world building.
Yeah.
But maybe the reason the next two aren't so successful and why like the rest of the books kind of feel different is because he might have been backpedaling a little bit to answer questions, whereas Tolkien had all the answers. He had the entire history of Middle Earth written before he even wrote the first book.
Definitely. And the other part of why I think the first one did so phenomenally and then the second and third one teetered off as they went was, at least from a movie telling standpoint, until you reach you have to reach a point or an understanding with your audience if you're going to be changing the main characters.
Yes.
Because
that's exactly what I was trying to get at is there's just that jump, especially between the first and second one.
Yeah.
Second and third, not so much. It's the first two where there's that.
It's a jump. And in the reading of the books, it was awkward in the reading at the beginning, and then you get into it and you don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And then after the second book, almost none of them are about the same people. It's just about the world itself and different people in it until you get to the very end. And then they all kind of come together. But it doesn't necessarily read that nicely in a movie format, especially when you're not set up for that.
It's like the reverse Lord of the Rings, where you can watch the original trilogy, you're good. You don't necessarily need to watch The Hobbit.
No, you could just watch The Hobbit. You don't need the other three.
But then you get into the Silmarillion, which Honestly,
boy.
parts of it, I hope they make, because I know Amazon's still potentially working on that.
I mean, I think that will be a forever project, maybe.
Yeah,
It's a lot.
From what I've seen, I would love to see some of the Silmarillion adapted.
Oh, same. It's just a lot.
It is a lot.
Which arguably is the same problem that they have with the rest of the world of Narnia is while Silmarillion, granted, is much more, like there's everyone ever created, laid out, a lot more lore put into it. It's kind of the reverse of that with Narnia is instead of explaining all of the lore that you've already been hinted at over 6 movies, plus, bonuses and extras, and spending almost 2 decades being obsessively compulsed by it by most of the world has been, Narnia has to build up all of that world, and it does that in the books, but I don't think that necessarily rolls nicely for most movies. Most of the time, you want to gradually build your world either like little and make it big, like Star Wars did, or even like Harry Potter. Yeah. Because Harry Potter, the first book, you're introduced to all these characters. Yep, you're introduced to characters, and you're introduced to, 3 main scenes. The normal Muggle world, the Diagon Alley, and not even all of it, just part of it. Yeah. And then Hogwarts. And not even all of Hogwarts either, just a little bit of Hogwarts. Yeah. Whereas with Narnia, you're immediately told, this is a whole country, have fun.
Yeah. Well, and even then incrementally, the next one where, we learn about Voldemort. Yeah. Then we find out Voldemort was a kid here. And he was still an asshole back then.
He was still a butt.
And that's the thing is, they just kept building and building the world as they went.
And it was always done in chunks that the reader could feel comfortable with.
Digestible chunks.
Whereas the Narnia world, when you're reading it, it all feels digestible. But that's because you can put a book down whenever you want. With a movie, the pace of Prince Caspian and Voyage expand the world so fast, and you're expected to now know that not just Narnia is a world, they've got neighbors, and there's the whole ocean that needs exploring, and we've got political problems now that we didn't have in the first one. Yeah. And if they had introduced just 1 or 2 of those, or even done it, and we're hoping for the TV series, where each week we're introduced to a new problem and a new...
Well, and that's the other thing, too, is the subsequent worlds of Narnia subsequent adventures in Narnia feel less and less magical.
And that's the point.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe the issue, because Lord of the Rings has that level of magic to it consistently.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they nailed the magic level with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Mm-hmm. And the purposes of the books are to explain that as Narnia, the country itself ages, the magic in the world slowly dies out. Mm-hmm. And there's more lore and backstory to all of that, and that's a whole different topic. But they don't explain that in Prince Caspian or Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
You're going to keep saying Dawn Terrier.
It feels correct to me.
Dawn Terrier sounds like the villain in some Spanish soap opera. It is I, Dawn Terrier.
I mean, yes. But, and even in the books, those 2 books, they hint at it, they explain it a little bit, but it's not till later on that you really understand that, but you've been having this cloud hang over your shoulder as you read the books. Yeah. It's harder to do that with a movie series, especially one like this one where we knew they were going to make the first one, and then they were like, oh, we're definitely going to make the second one. Everyone was like, okay, great, second one, not my favorite book, but okay. And after the second one, everyone kind of went, that's it, right? Because they didn't immediately they didn't immediately set you up because they had to be ready to not make a third one.
Well, and one thing on my side of things, when I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, yes, it begins with these hippies picking some food out of the trash, and as they're singing a Charles Manson song. Ah, yes. And I've brought that up to a few people who have watched the movie, and once they know of that, it's that looming, if you don't know the history of that time frame, exactly, then that it doesn't have that same impact, because that whole time you see the Manson family getting more and more integrated into the story, and they're that ever looming present of where the story's supposed to go.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the problem that the last two movies of the Narnia universe had. And again, we could do whole shows on just those two. But yeah, that was kind of the problem, was it's the cloud, according to how the story has been told so far, the cloud should be lifted. We should have a new bad guy. And we don't really get a predominant new bad guy to fight. And that's not how the story was supposed to go. But it doesn't translate to movies super great.
No. And yeah, that's where it fails.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So I know we've talked about the book a lot.
Yes.
Because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the book.
No, not this version anyway.
Yeah. Specifically this movie, Chris.
Yes.
What would you rate it?
This movie is on my Christmas list. I watch it every single year. I love and adore this movie. Specifically this movie. I have the other ones. I've watched the other ones. I don't love them. I could easily never watch them again. It's not a full year for me if I don't watch Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So for me, this is close to a 10. This is close to a perfect score for a movie by itself. By itself.
Yes, I want to specify by itself. Not taking the legacy of this movie into consideration.
No, by itself, this movie is a phenomenally wonderful and beautiful movie to me, and it's one of those ones that it doesn't really matter who you're watching a movie with. This movie could fit the situation. It's a good parent movie, it's a good babysitting movie, it's a good, couples movie, it's a good Christmas movie, it's a good Easter movie, it's a good all-the-time movie. Granted, I don't necessarily think this is one of the ones that I would binge watch. I binge watch Monty Python. I binge watch some of the other comedies or even some horror movies. This isn't a binge watcher, but this is one that if you haven't watched it recently, if you haven't watched this movie in the last 5 years, you should rewatch it. It's still as beautiful as you remember it.
Yes, visual effects, I love this movie. Story-wise is solid. For me, though, I did not grow up with C.S. Lewis, so I don't have that same sentimentality. Technically, I didn't really grow up with Tolkien either, but the movies came out when I was a child.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think it just depends on the person, because I have a feeling if I was introduced to this when I was just a little bit younger, I would have loved it more.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I definitely agree with your thought that this is a beginner's high fantasy movie.
Yeah, this is a good entry movie.
But I don't know, I feel this movie and Harry Potter are so ingrained into the lead up into them making the Hunger Games.
Oh, sure.
What's that one where they're Maze Runner?
Oh, yeah.
All these young adults movies.
Recreation of books.
Yes.
Yeah.
This one I feel is just a step below that because it is more geared towards children than young adults.
Fair.
But recommending the movie wise, I would say it's definitely worth a watch. I know it's not going to be some people's cup of tea. I would
Naturally.
I mean, I would have it on if we're having a Christmas night for someone who doesn't want to watch Santa's Sleigh or Santa Conquers the Martians.
Yeah, and that's kind of yes, loud kitty. That's kind of part of the reason why I love this Narnia movie specifically, is because it is sometimes hard to pick a movie to watch, even just for yourself sitting at home alone. And this is one of the ones that I keep on my shelf at an eye level because, like I said, I don't watch it every single week. I don't even watch it every single month. But if I'm in a mood where I can't pick a movie, I don't know what I want, this is a good one to put on because it does fit a lot of voids, and it's always you're always going to feel the same wonder and amazement each time you watch it.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And before we go, I do want to ask you a question.
Oh, yes.
Maybe a little food for thought.
Oh.
Another, because I've been thinking about my own childhood recently after watching this. And I was wondering if you could have another movie series that's beloved to you based off a childhood book, what would you pick?
Ooh, that's a hard one. It's not based off a childhood book because while I was an avid reader as a child and to the point where I checked out 5 to 10 books a week and would get through all of them. Yeah. And, I read Harry Potter really early as a reader. I actually have a movie that I would really like to see them remake. I love Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
I've never...
I know you've never seen it.
You bring this one up all the time.
I know, and part of the reason why I think I want it remade is because I did recently rewatch it because it's on Disney Plus, thankfully, because I don't know where else you're going to find this movie. It's so old. And it's one of those Disney movies that a lot of us watched. Yeah, you're so talky. A lot of us watched growing up, and only a couple of us kept watching it.
Mm-hmm.
I recently rewatched it, and it's similar to how Mary Poppins is done, where it's live action people with some background green screen, real low level CGI with some hand drawn animation over the top of it. And the story of Bedknobs and Broomsticks is a really nice and compelling story that, because of when it came out and how children's films were done and needing it to be a Disney live action, it needed to fit a mold.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the ones that could be really cool to be redone and strip out all of the awkward old bits and bring it up to a more adult audience. Because it's a really cool story about a girl who buys a set of books via what we would consider like the internet. She buys them over the phone by a guy who thinks he's a con artist. Turns out he's selling real witchcraft books, and she actually teaches herself witchcraft.
Interesting.
And it's all kind of set in similar time set as this movie. It's very British. It's very post World War II, but not so far out. I don't know. It has the vibes that Narnia does, where it could very nicely be brought back to life, similar to how this movie did it.
Okay. Well, the reason I brought it up a little bit, one, I don't know, the one you mentioned, I can't remember its name.
It's okay.
Because for me, I've been thinking back on it a little bit, and if I could get the license to write one specific movie, write or direct something of this genre, one that I feel is overlooked, that was, I feel, a little bit more popular in, like, your crowd and my crowd of kids.
Oh, yeah.
The Redwall franchise.
Did you not watch the TV series?
I've seen the Redwall one, the
animated one.
Yeah, I would say they didn't give it justice.
Oh, no, they didn't.
Because
the animation was cute for a TV short.
And for like kind of a stop frame.
It was poorly done.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
They tried.
Yeah, and
the Redwall series would be really good. I'm trying to get my husband to read it right now, and no success so far.
No, I don't think it's his kind of book. But I feel Redwall would fall into the same issues that... with the exception of the first two, I don't think any of them really tie together. It's just all world building. There's a lot of world building. I know there's...
It jumps through history really hard.
Yeah, because there's Redwood or Redwall, which is the first book, and then Mossflower, which is the prequel.
No, it's post. It's about his son.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the one where they're going to the mountain. And I never finished the entire series, but it's one of those ones. Let
me tell you, as someone who... I'm 3 books off from finishing the whole series, and mostly because I can't find 3 of the books to finish it. Redwall would suffer the same problem that Narnia, because a lot of us read the first one, and then we read Mossflower, and then maybe you got to Silmarillion. Or not Silmarillion, but it also starts with S. It's about a mountain.
Salamander or something.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's the name of the mountain. I can't remember it. But there's an ungodly amount of books in that series, and none of them... They all tie together. It's all about the same world. It's all about the same history. And it's all happening close enough that each book could be referenced in the next book. But yeah, without having a solid character to revolve around, like the Skywalker family or Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It's really hard visually to tell those stories. But now we have TV. And now we have Netflix adaptation shows, and I honestly think that's where these sort of things could be really well done. Yeah,
and this is a series, I brought it up because I had a dream about it. Completely different, but I'll hold that off for some other day. But it's, I don't know, it's just me reminiscing about stuff, so.
No, I think it's a good thought, because, I think a lot of because I did read a lot of high fantasy books as a kid, and a lot of them do have this problem where, in book form, having a long, detailed history plotted out does help really nice. And that's part of where Tolkien was one of the odd man out, is he had The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings series. It's pretty much around the same people. It's about the same problem. It's a nice storyline. It follows through to the end. It's fairly straight and narrow. Yeah. You've got a plot and some main characters.
Yep.
A lot of these other ones, it kind of suffers from some same problem. It's a lot. It's just world building.
I mean, maybe we'll see something like that because, I mean, the Golden Compass is coming back around.
Yeah.
And I know there's some other little ones that are popping up here and there too. So
definitely. And
Artemis Fowl. That's another one that's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, that was another really good world building one. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm hoping that, and I think we've started to see that with some of the new, especially Netflix and Amazon originals that have been coming out. Mm-hmm. I think I'm hoping anyway that those can move away from the dark, gritty, modern tales and move more towards the high fantasy, because I think that's where they would really shine.
Yeah. And
or at least that's what I would like.
Same here. Well, we'll see. I mean, there's a uptake in Lovecraftian movies, which...
This is true.
Narnia didn't get away from that. They wanted to make the goblins feel Lovecraftian.
Yeah. I get it.
Yep. So... Anywho, a little bit of tangent at the end here, but this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.